Hello friends, this is Utz. You would know if you read the source material, and today we're gonna go over every single killer from Trapper up until the Cenobite, the very latest one released, and I'm gonna give you my ultra quick thoughts on what changes I think would make them better. And by better, I mean they are more fun if they're boring, their add-ons are more interesting if they are useless, they are a little bit more fair if they are just too strong, they are a bit more competitive if they happen to be one of the weaker killers. That's what I'm aiming for, just to normalize all the killers, make them a bit more close to each other. Compared to some months back, I think we've made amazing progress. The strongest killers in the game are now not nearly as far from the weakest killers in the game, but some changes could still be made. So we're going to be ranking killers from 1 star to 2 stars to 3 stars. The more stars, the better the killer is, the less changes needed. The fewer stars, the killer needs more and more changes to overcome one or many of their issues. So with that out of the way, let's start with Trapper. What is the deal with Trapper? Some people expect Trapper to be reworked in a way that makes him some insane, unstoppable top-tier killer. If that was the case, this would definitely be major issues. He would need to be reworked from the ground up. I don't think this needs to be the case. In my opinion, Trapper needs some changes. A few tweaks to his numbers, and he would suddenly perform a lot better. One of the biggest issues is the trap availability for Trapper. In some maps, if you're unlucky, you can spawn with 5 traps. And if you're particularly unlucky, 1 or 2 of these 5 traps could spawn on a second floor, in a very difficult to reach building, on a hill that is facing outwards and you need to waste a lot of time getting into, in a completely desolate corner of the map where no survivor will ever go, so you need to go out of your way and spend many precious seconds picking up your power. This obviously is terrible. Even if you pick up these traps with your very limited 1 trap capacity, you might not be able to carry them all at once, which is very cumbersome and annoying. People use the back traps, the trap bags add-ons for 2 reasons. So that they can carry more traps and that more traps spawn on the map. I think this is a mistake. There should be a number, maybe 6 or 7 traps that should always spawn on any given map, regardless of add-ons. And the Trapper probably should carry, at least by default, 2 traps. At least. I don't want him to carry 6 or 7 traps at once. Otherwise, you'll have trappers that just chase you, put a trap here, eventually corral you, put you in the basement, and then trap literally every entrance. And I think that gameplay should not be what's most encouraged. Unfortunately, that gameplay is precisely what the Trapper excels at. So, you're not truly rewarded for setting up traps in different places because the traps are so inconsistent. You're basically rewarded for choking certain places and just sitting on top of your traps. One change that would be really nice. Right now, survivors can go through your traps with dead hard or by holding them open if another survivor is involved. But you yourself cannot go through your traps. I think this should be reverted. If survivors can go through your traps, I think you should be able to go through them as well. When you step on your own trap, you should hear a noise that the survivors can hear. The trap becomes disarmed, but you don't get caught in it. You don't get caught in it, unless maybe we create some new add-on that has a different condition. The point of this is so that if a survivor uses dead hard through one of your traps, you can still catch them, and you're not punished for not being able to go through. You have the tactical decision to go through your trap and disarm it, and the survivors have the information that you're doing that. But also, you don't get to set 3 traps in the basement and just camp there, and survivors cannot go through, but you can go through, so you just camp and there's literally nothing they can do. So this would be, I think, a better compromise for his traps. One of the main problems of his traps used to be inconsistency. Survivors could escape on the first attempt in just a few seconds, or they could be there literally forever. This has been changed. The Trapper now will keep you in his traps for 6 attempts, but no more unless some add-ons are involved. So now that part of RNG is a little bit better. So a survivor will never be on a trap for minutes if they're very unlucky. But that also means that it's easier to escape quick. And the instances where survivors escape on their first or second attempt are obviously more numerous. And also survivors being rescued by other survivors is incredibly fast. Much faster than you setting the trap. And of course, it doesn't take into account the time that you spend picking it up, setting it there, and risking the trap being disarmed. So keeping that risk into account, using your trap sometimes is a major hindrance. I think there should be a bit more weight behind them. I don't want anything else that will add more RNG to traps. But in my personal opinion, stepping on a trap should be a bit more consequential. If a survivor steps on a trap and they want to try to escape by themselves, good, they take their chances. If they are being rescued, which is a guaranteed way to escape, that's fine, but it should take at least a second extra, because right now it's barely 2 seconds, while you yourself spend more time than that setting the trap up. So rescue time should absolutely be a little bit higher. Another thing that I think is really, really crucial is what happens when a survivor steps on a trap and they're already injured. Now, if a survivor is healthy and they step on a trap, they become injured, which is awesome. But what happens if the survivor is already injured? And the answer is completely nothing. In fact, while they are in the trap, they can use perks. So if you grab an injured survivor of a trap, they can hit you with decisive. They can be flashlight saved or pallet saved by a teammate. They can, of course, get adrenaline while they're on the trap, and if you hit them, they'll sprint off. They can also have borrowed time, and if you hit them, that's a bad idea. So there's really no, like, if you step on a trap and you get rescued by a teammate, that is actually faster and gives you more blood points than if you just disarm it. I don't think it makes any sense to me that stepping on a trap is a better idea than disarming it. That, to me, makes no sense. I've also neglected to mention that when a survivor steps on a trap, if you're chasing them, I'm pretty sure this is still the case, you lose the chase. But that's only for the emblem system, that's not really a big deal. But many of these things make no sense to me. In my opinion, injured survivors should not be able to step on 5 traps back to back and just disarm all the setup that you've done without no consequences. Getting off a trap should at least trigger the... If you're injured, getting off a trap by yourself should at least trigger the deep wound status effect, like Legion does, or like Deathslinger does. Some form of slowdown to help the trapper and to reward you for catching a survivor injured, as opposed to punishing you for catching a survivor injured because now they're off and they do nothing. So whether it's deep wound or some other form of punishment for injured survivor stepping in a trap, I think trapper would really benefit from that. As we mentioned earlier, trapper also has a really hard time picking up traps that can spawn in the corners of the map. Some people suggest that the traps could spawn in lockers, and anytime the trapper he can open a locker, find a trap there, and that would be a great way to improve his flow and make him not have to do awkward pathing to pick up his own power. I think this is not necessary. I think they could just code that the trap should spawn centralized in the map, and that would be a pretty good change already. But anything like this, honestly, there's probably more than one way of doing it. Anything like this would probably be a massive improvement already. Hitboxes on traps are also a little bit iffy. They're very, very hard to understand. Sometimes we've seen that some characters go over traps without problem, and some others get caught, and it's really a bit inconsistent. I wouldn't be too upset if the trap hitbox was maybe made a bit larger vertically or even horizontally. I don't understand how it works, but it would be a little bit nice if it was a bit more consistent, because right now, as a trapper, you really need to be very, very precise and rely a little bit on luck on some places. So that could also be a change that we could see. But yeah, if we do that and we go over some of these add-ons that are honestly really, really, really bad, trapper would be quite incredible. And by really bad add-ons, I'm talking about things like Serrated Jaws, where a survivor that's off a trap now drops a bit more blood. Except that's useless, because if you're very far away, it doesn't make a difference, and if you're right there, you're probably gonna down the survivor anyway. So a little add-on pass would be okay. The add-ons that currently give you extra traps, some of them could be repurposed to do other things. It would also be really nice if we had an add-on or a base ability to set up traps without making noise. Little things like that could make this killer quite fun. So overall, he needs some changes, but he's really not in a horrible, horrible place. Now, Wraith is a bit of a surprise. For the longest time, this would have been a killer that needed several changes to compete and keep up with other killers. But as it turns out, they were quite brave. And in the last batch of changes to Wraith, they really made him really powerful. The last time any developer talked about this killer was to say that they were absolutely at the top of the kill rate. So this is the killer in Dead by Daylight that possibly gets the most kills, or at least he was some time ago. I suspect that after people have learned how he works now, he's not going to be that much of a threat anymore, but still, he's one of the best performing killers, and it's because he's easy, he's free, and his power is now quite a threat. And he also because of the virtue of now being really fast, in his cloak state, he also doesn't mind larger maps nearly as much as your average killer. So I think Wraith right now is in a great spot. People that play against him in solo groups, people that don't really understand his weaknesses, they might even think he is OP, which I completely disagree with. I don't need to tell you anything else other than go watch a tournament where someone plays Wraith against decent survivors. If survivors do not give him free hits and do not greet pallets and they know what they're doing, this killer has 1 or 2 strengths and that's it. And those immediately evaporate. So by no means I think this killer is overpowered or overtuned in any single way. The only exception perhaps being some of his add-ons and some of the weird inconsistencies that they have. Now, as I said, this killer moves really fast. He is stealthy, so if you're not super well coordinated, he will often get a first hit out of you, and he is extremely easy to play, which I personally don't enjoy. I know that out of 25 or 26 killers soon, we might as well have 1 or 2 that are not super complex. But let's go over that. What is the issue with the add-ons? His best add-on is probably All-Seeing Blood. All-Seeing Blood is an iridescent level of add-on. It lets you see people around you, which is super useful when navigating the map. It also lets you see the people that you're going to ambush, which makes it extremely difficult to mind game him or to trick him in any loop. It also works extremely well in buildings where he is naturally good at surprising you. So this add-on is extremely powerful. In my opinion, I think this add-on should stop working when you uncloak. Perhaps. And that would maybe help a little bit. Give it some condition. You could reduce the... you should probably make it an iridescent, as opposed to the other all-seeing. There's an all-seeing spirit that is less good than this. So you should probably reduce the range, or make it stop working when you're uncloaking. Or make it only work while you're, if you change this add-on a little bit, probably much of the frustration will be gone. The Windstorm add-ons are now also really good. He's obviously very fast and he doesn't need them, but having them on is very good still. If we were to nerf them a little bit, to encourage him to stay cloaked but not be necessarily cloaked up until the very moment of the hit, I would make this add-on to work for the first 5 seconds of cloaking. You hook a survivor, you cloak, you're fast for 5 seconds, and now you must make something out of those 5 seconds, as opposed to just chasing survivors in cloak form constantly and hitting a survivor and then cloaking immediately, as opposed to having this forever, if we really needed to change that. But I honestly think most of his add-ons are completely fine, and with minimal changes he would be very okay. I am personally okay with the way Wraith is right now. If I had to actually nerf something about him, I believe that now he uncloaks in 3 seconds. Without add-ons, of course. One thing that I don't like about Wraith players is that they don't really... if you used to play Wraith back when he was very slow, you know for a fact that if you uncloak at someone's face, even if they didn't have any perks, they would mostly outrun you to safety. And it was very frustrating, and it actually encouraged you to be very sneaky. If a survivor is working on a generator, you would not go straight to the generator. Instead, you would look away to full spine shield, you would go around, spending 5 extra seconds going around some building, and then attack them from behind. And that was very satisfying. And that part of Wraith is now completely gone. So if I had to add one controversial change, I would make it so that the Wraith is a little bit slower if he uncloaks while a survivor is looking at him. Similar to Ghostface, if a survivor is looking at you and he's revealing you, instead of 3 seconds, you will uncloak in 3.5 or 3.75 or 4 seconds. A little bit slower with everything else being the same. Meanwhile, if a survivor is not looking at you, you will uncloak in maybe less, 2.5 or the current 3 seconds or 2.75 or whatever. It would be really nice to encourage Wraiths to be sneaky, as opposed to just go in a straight line, uncloak, easy hit, then cloak again, then keep chasing with your speed, then uncloak, then hit. Perhaps the uncloaking should make you a little bit slower, so that raids are not encouraged to just hit, cloak, catch up, hit, uncloak, catch up, and so on. because that part of Wraith is a little bit boring and devoid of almost any thinking or skill or planning for the most part. But at any rate, even if Wraith wasn't changed, I think he's completely fine, and he deserves some of the features that he has now that he has been craving for years. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Wraith. Next up, Hillbilly. Now Hillbilly is a killer that has been reworked quite heavily, mostly add-ons, and I think his problem still relies mostly on add-ons. The old Hillbilly was one of the better regarded killers in the whole cast. Almost everybody agreed that he was fair, with some very minor exceptions. The developers took it a bit too far, took some of his problematic add-ons and just blasted them out of existence, and give us a bunch of add-ons that are actually really, really awful. And now obviously his base kit is also a little bit weaker because he has the whole overheating problem. In my opinion, base kit Billy is nearly perfect right now. The only thing that I find a little bit upsetting is just how punishing it is to bump into things. You have a ridiculously long cooldown for bumping into things. I understand that it is a one-hit kill he has. I still think it could be a bit shorter. Other killers that can do crazy things have a much, much shorter cooldown where they retain some mobility. Meanwhile, this killer is literally stopped in place for almost 4 seconds, I believe, and it is really, really bad. So I would encourage Hillbilly players to use their chainsaw a little bit more. They already have an overheating system preventing them from using it all the time, and not punish them for bumping nearly as much. Even if you have the bumping add-ons, there's 2 of them, I still think his bump is really, really awful. And it does encourage the player to just be a lot more safe and not really go for anything spectacular, which is a sad thing. Now, that aside, I think Billy's fine, other than his add-ons. His add-ons right now are a disaster. Some of them are completely unusable. Some of them are actually a detriment to him. Some of them have extremely niche utilities that only work in certain maps or certain builds. And it is really, really sad to see, especially when he had such strong add-ons before. Cooldown add-ons that he lost should be back. The cooldown add-ons in the past were not OP at all. The only reason they might have been strong is because some of the cooldown add-ons also had other very strong effects. There's no reason for this killer not to have at least one decent cooldown add-on. Again, to encourage Hillbillies to use their chainsaw a bit more in chase and not be punished as much. It also wouldn't be a crazy idea to have the equivalent of a brown spark pluck. A single add-on to reduce the charge time just slightly would be okay. And if we just have a look at some of the other add-ons right now that don't do anything, I think this killer would be completely fine. It's just that it's quite a lot of add-ons to go through. I've also even considering how much harder this killer is, whether or not the low pro chains, which is one of his best add-ons, should be base kit. That I leave up to you. Do you think this killer should be able to go through drop pallets and keep going with his chainsaw as a base kit ability, or should that remain a purple add-on? Part of me wishes it was base kit, but I'm not sure. If the other add-ons were okay, I think he wouldn't necessarily require that. Other than that, Hillbilly is mostly fine. He can do okay in most maps, and the only thing about him that is kind of painful is when you get a map that has tons of windows and maybe a few pallets here and there that makes using his power difficult. But I think that's fair, and maybe that's more on the maps than on Hillbilly. Next is Nurse. Depending how you look at her, Nurse is either almost just completely fine and 3 stars, just some changes, or completely messing this entire game. In my opinion, Nurse is one of the biggest problems Dead by Daylight has in some ways. She alone by herself gatekeeps and bottlenecks many of the developers' decisions. Now think about a perk like Amaliers that shows you the aura of a survivor for 6 seconds. What if that perk instead of 6 seconds was 12 seconds? Would that be OP on Trapper? No. Would that be OP on Hag? No. Would that be OP on Clown? Absolutely not. Would that be OP on Nurse? Probably. What if Retribution, which is a really underrated perk, instead of 10 seconds was 20 seconds? On every killer other than Nurse, that perk would be totally fine. But on Nurse, it's busted. Similar to Starstruck. Starstruck is a perk that works on maybe 1 or 2 killers. Almost every other killer, Starstruck is not a big threat on. Starstruck on Nurse is stupidly ridiculous. Insta-down perks on her are ridiculously powerful. Any perk that you could make that regarding breaking pallets, breaking walls, breaking generators, almost completely useless on her. But many of the perks that involve auto reading and lethality would be broken on this killer. For that reason, it upsets me to know that many of the perks that could be really balanced for the rest of the cast will never get a proper buff because they would be busted on this killer. In my opinion, her ability should be a bit like Oni. She should have to chase people normally, and when she powers up, she would have her ability to use the blinks and catch up, so that at least she has to go through some pallets, she has to go through some windows, she has to play a little bit more like the other killers. But that is quite ambitious and probably quite controversial, and the fact is that Nurse is the killer, at least was some time ago, with the lowest kill rate among the entire cast. So the most overpowered killer is also the killer that does the worst. And that is because she is very difficult, and because on console she is very hard to control as well. So keeping that into account, do we need to nerf and change a killer that, objectively speaking, is doing really badly? Even though I only see Nurses at the higher ranks? No, probably not. Nurse is probably mostly fine. The changes that she received some time ago that made her have fatigue and recovery are mostly good. It really separates the good from the mediocre Nurses, and that's okay. The one thing I really still don't understand and I don't like is just how badly her add-ons scale. Her iridescent add-ons are a joke, you never see them. Most of her purple add-ons are gimmicky and nobody runs them. And then it's all about the recovery, the recharge rate add-ons, and the distance add-ons. That's it. You have the Nurse with distance add-ons and with recovery add-ons, and you see almost nothing else, and it's very upsetting, even though she's got a few other add-ons that are okay-ish. So perhaps, in my opinion, these add-ons, much like they did with Demogorgon, these add-ons should be nerfed a little bit. Some of the other add-ons could be reconsidered, maybe the rarities could be swapped. Just so that Nurse is not a killer who's already very strong, who has add-ons that make her very unpredictable. Because that's the really unfun part about playing Nurse. You make a really good play against her, she literally spins herself, misses, and you make a lot of distance, and now she's holding her blink onto you, and you don't know whether or not what you did amounts to anything. If the Nurse is playing with that add-ons, you're fine. You're maybe gonna loop her for another 20 minutes. If she has a particular set of add-ons, then she's going to be on top of your ass immediately again, and that feels really bad not knowing which one it is. So maybe reducing the impact of the add-ons would be a good thing. Another more crazy out there idea that I think could be worth considering, and please let me know what you think about this one, is making the Nurse blink attacks not basic attacks. Right now the Nurse benefits from Make Your Choice, from Sloppy Butcher, from Haunt the Ground, from Devour Hope, from Noid, while using her power. And even though I understand why, I often ask myself if this is fair, considering that her power really is something really hard to avoid. So perhaps if we want to make certain perks really decent on every killer, but also not have to worry about the Nurse being completely busted with them, that should be something that could be considered, and then she would probably be fine and have to maybe rely on her own add-ons to inflict special attack effects. Just a thought. Not really have thought that one through a hell of a lot, but that's my reasoning why. Next up is Huntress. Huntress is a killer that I honestly think is completely fine. Very well established weaknesses, very well established strengths. A survivor that is really good and has a really good grasp on their environment will make it very hard to catch them. But a really good Huntress will be able to make the most out of almost anywhere, and eventually choke a survivor into a corner and corral them and get guaranteed hits out of them. Obviously, people don't enjoy her hitboxes plus the latency, but I honestly think they are okay and consistent, and good survivors and good huntresses mostly know what they're doing, and there's not a lot of RNG or weird elements to her gameplay. Now, some time ago, I would have told you that she's got some of the most busted add-ons in the game. Luckily, the developers have listened, and her iridescent head now only gives you 1 hatchet that insta-downs, as opposed to 3 with certain add-ons. So her add-ons, as far as I'm concerned, are mostly okay. Some of them still, I feel, a little bit underpowered. If I'm completely honest, I would still make some changes. But I would say that Huntress is pretty much perfect, and I would be very afraid of a major rework. I think she is okay the way she is. So without further ado, I think we should just move on. And yeah, I think that's it. There's not much else to say. Next up is Michael, and I don't know what to say about this killer. I think this is the opposite. I think this killer has not aged well at all. I still wouldn't lobby for a major rework. I still think he can be salvaged. But where to begin? Let's begin with his tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. In tier 2, Michael has a 60-meter terror radius. He vaults windows slightly faster. It's basically a normal killer. He's gonna spend most of the time there. But before he gets to tier 2, he is in tier 1, and he moves very slowly in tier 1. So slowly that chasing survivors is just a horrible idea, and your number 1 priority at the start of the match is to get out of tier 1. The problem with getting out of tier 1 is that depending on the map, it can take a very, very long time. You are very much encouraged to run the most basic and popular add-ons, the stock and grade add-ons, to get out of tier 1 as soon as possible. And nowadays, with dedicated servers being a thing, and you don't really have a lot of room to do anything creative in tier 1. The best thing you can do in tier 1 is get out of it quick, and that's it. If you try to go for a grab and it fails, you will be stuck in tier 1 for a long time. If you try to do something risky and it backfires, you will be in tier 1 for a long time. And only after you get to tier 2, you will start to actually have pressure on the survivors. Luckily, some of this lack of pressure early on is compensated by the fact that you do have decent pressure later on when you get to tier 3. But the tier 3 itself is also not extremely impactful. You do have a slightly longer launch, which is nice. You do vault windows a tiny little bit faster, but that's it. That's it. Many people have suggested that Michael should be more resistant to stuns in tier 3. I agree. Many people have argued that Michael in tier 3 should have a slightly faster pallet break-in speed. I could understand a concern that maybe this with brutal strength would be too strong, but there's another killer called the Wraith that can do that and more, and he's not busted. So I think that's also a great idea. I also think it would be awesome if he could break breakable walls just by walking through them in tier 3. Maybe walking through them while holding the stock button breaks them, or maybe just walking through them breaks them and he gets a little bit of a slowdown, just a tiny little bit. I think that would be great. It would be incredibly thematic. It would actually make the few places with breakable walls a lot more interesting. There's another killer that can break breakable walls very, very quickly. He's the Nemesis in tier 2, and he is actually amazing in many places that are really, really strong, such as the main building of Gas Heaven. Being able to break through the breakable walls almost immediately with almost no cooldown is super, super good. So I think that would make his tier 3 a lot more scary and a lot more interesting. Almost everything else about it is fine. Getting back to tier 1, in my opinion, tier 1 should be a resource and not a hindrance. If Ghostface can have a great early game, and Wraith can have a great early game by virtue of being stealthy, why can't Michael? His tier 1 should not be 5 seconds of stock. It should probably be more like 2.5. If you hit a survivor, or if you grab a survivor, I think that should automatically 99 your tier 1, so that you're just one tap away, so that you don't have the fear of like, oh, do I go for the grab or is it going to backfire? I think that would also be awesome. And tier 1 should not be affected by Stalk and Great add-ons, so that you do not have to run the best add-ons to get out of tier 1 faster. This way, I think his early game would be a lot better, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference on the rest of his kit. It would just make your early game not a complete hit or miss. With that being said, After that, what's the main issue with Myers? I think he's simple enough. He's not going to be one of the top tier killers because he doesn't have any crazy mobility, any crazy anti-loop or anything like that. But still, being able to one-shot survivors and be a little bit stealthy throughout the match, I think that's pretty good and can be quite okay with the certain perks here and there. His problem after that is mostly add-ons. His add-ons are stupid and obviously are headed for a massive rework. Let's go over some of them real quick. We have an add-on, for example. We have 3 add-ons that make you faster while you stalk, which is almost completely useless. Just make 1 or 2 of these add-ons base kit and remove them. Typically, Michael, when he stalks, is very slow and he's standing still behind a loop or from a distance. These add-ons really don't do anything. If you wanted to, they could make it so that stalking from afar is a little bit more viable. Because right now, stalking multiple survivors is not a great idea, and stalking from afar is also quite sad. Then we also have an add-on that only works in Evil Within 1, which you should probably never stay in. Terrible stuff. We have add-ons that are, for example, this add-on increases the duration of tier 3. This add-on also increases the duration of tier 3, and this add-on also increases the duration of tier 3. But somehow, the green one has the best bang for your buck. So even some of these add-ons that can be useful, they scale really badly and should be reconsidered. This really reminds me of the hack back in the day when her add-ons had a lot of downsides, and eventually they just removed the downsides and made them simpler. This add-on should probably have lower values but have no downside, probably. Then we have the Scratch Mirror and the Bandit Mirror. I think these add-ons are a complete disaster. I know people really like them because they're really fun when you send yourself to certain maps, but other than that, they are really awful. I think they should be reconsidered. And maybe not lock you in tier 1 and tier 2. It could be okay if they thought about it more and didn't give you a massive movement speed reduction in the case of Bandit Mirror, but yeah. Then we have the friggin' Tough Affair, which gives you infinite tier 3. I don't know how to feel about this add-on. I think that in a team that has a weak link, it can be quite oppressive. But for a new Deathslinger, I think it could honestly stay. Then we have the Judith Tombstone and the Tombstone Piece. The Judith Tombstone, it can be very annoying. You need to run it with Cloud Food because you're very slow. People often run this to get their achievement, and it's really stupid when survivors just go into a locker and you cannot do anything. I would make these add-ons be able to murder people in lockers and be able to murder them off the ground if needed. But I would give them requirements. For Judith's Tombstone, it would be like an old Mori. You can use it only in tier 3, obviously. It obviously increases the amount of tier 3, but this only works on injured survivors. On survivors that have been already hooked. And that's it. You could then maybe consider removing the speed. The speed debuff. And maybe this add-on could be okay. And this add-on could be a similar deal. Right now the Tombstone Piece is even better because it doesn't have the speed limit. It could be a similar deal, but perhaps it only works if survivors have been hooked twice or something like that. These two add-ons seriously are kind of weird and potentially very unfair and very strong. So if they just... if we don't have to worry about these add-ons being so OP, I think other parts of Michael could be buffed and other add-ons could be brought to a similar level, and it would probably be for the best. And after that, I think Michael wouldn't be the best, but he would be quite good. Next up is Hag. I think Hag is mostly fine. People don't seem to get a lot of kills with her at lower levels. She's complicated. People get her for her perks and almost never play her. But she's actually really strong. She doesn't depend on a lot of maps. Even in maps that are sometimes unfavorable to other killers, she can perform just fine. She also doesn't need a lot of perks. And her add-ons are, despite having a few add-ons that are just straight up weird and bad, most of her add-ons are actually pretty incredible, and they scale really well, with brown add-ons being good, yellow add-ons being even better, green add-ons being incredible. So I think Hag is really strong. One thing that I find upsetting about Hag is how her traps can be disarmed. There's basically two ways to disarm traps. The first one is to have a flashlight. It takes less than half a second and you disarm a trap immediately with absolutely no warning if the killer's not paying attention. And the other one is to trigger it and run away, which is also very effective. The killer obviously can teleport, but if you do it right, they shouldn't be able to hit you. The problem is you don't have a different way of disarming the trap if you don't have a flashlight. And so you have these situations where a person with a flashlight is really, really, really strong, but a person without a flashlight cannot do anything about a trap being somewhere. In my opinion, this should be evened a little bit. People with a flashlight should have to use a considerable amount of their fuel, of their battery, to disarm the trap. Instead of like a third of a second, it should be more like half or a whole second of aiming towards the trap. Similar to blinding a killer, takes a second. And survivors that don't have any flashlight, they should have a different alternative way of disarming a trap. If you crouch on top of the trap and stay there for, say, 3 seconds, the trap should disappear, as if you stepped on it. Now, this is very difficult. You need to crouch, get on top of the trap, and then wait there on top of it 3 seconds. So it basically takes longer than disarming a trapper trap. But it would be a way to be able to get rid of a trap without a flashlight, to avoid all awkward camping situations, and to encourage the hack to not put all of her eggs in one basket, but actually place a bunch of traps around instead of just trying to camp one location or one hook or whatever. Other ideas that I've suggested or that I've enjoyed in the past is the fact that the hack either cannot place traps near her hooks, which I think is a bit restricted, but okay, or when a survivor unhooks another survivor, traps nearby, let's say 5 or 6 meter radius, get removed. It would be very similar to how for example, Pyramidhead cannot set trails next to hooks and stuff like that. I don't think that's a crazy idea. I think either that or the previous thing I suggested would probably make her fine. Just to maybe encourage the hags to move a little bit more, set a bit more traps, as opposed to just being ultra mega defensive. But I don't know if that would be enough to encourage people to go around and set enough traps. I generally don't know. Maybe people would still do it. That being said, I think Hag is mostly okay. And the fact that she's not one of the highest performing or one of the highest played is because people just maybe don't enjoy or appreciate her playstyle. But I think she's okay. Next, we move on to the Doctor. Now, the Doctor has an issue that is maybe a little bit different than other killers. And it's the fact that his power can be very, very draining for people that have sensory overload issues. So I would really like to see, this has nothing to do with his strength or his viability. I would really like to see his power, or at least having some option to make his power not completely drill your head and murder your eyes and make you feel sick if you're one of those people. So with that completely, putting that completely aside, what else is wrong with Doctor to fix? I think not a lot. I think Doctor's mostly okay. His discipline add-ons make his shock a little bit quicker. I don't know how healthy these add-ons are. Maybe these add-ons should, part of these add-ons should be base. Because it feels kind of silly that when you shock a survivor, you're basically trying to predict what ping they have and whether or not they're going to be able to vault or not. It would be nice to have a bit more consistency there. But for the most part, Doctor has perfectly fine counterplay, perfectly fine strengths. He is good at finding survivors, he's good at stalling them for a little bit, he has some anti-loop, but he doesn't have any built-in lethality, he doesn't have any crazy mobility, he's after all M1 killer, so he doesn't have any range attack. I think his ratio of strengths and weaknesses are quite alrightly balanced, and I honestly wouldn't mess with him much. His add-ons are a little bit weird, some of them are strange, and the developers seem to be keen on keeping them very, very weird. I'm talking especially about the tape add-ons that give him very, very strange shape. If we wanted to focus on making them a little bit easier to use, maybe some of these add-ons could be changed. But since he has such an abundance of other weird and creepy add-ons that do all kinds of like side effects, I honestly think he's fine. So I give Doctor a 3 out of 3. I think he's all right, and I really wouldn't change him very much. He's an average killer, and that's probably a good thing. Now we have Cannibal. What's wrong with Cannibal? Oh man, almost nothing. And I'm so happy to say that. Cannibal's completely fine, save for just a couple things that we'll get to. In his base kit, the Cannibal has a feature that if he reps his chainsaw for a little bit too long, he will go into tantrum. The developers seemingly came up with this idea to prevent a Cannibal just camping the hook like this with his chainsaw up. But the truth is, he doesn't need to. A Cannibal can just sit on a hook, and the moment a survivor gets close enough, he can rev up his Shinso and then down them. And if the survivor, by some miracle, gets the unhook, he can hit the hooker, the unhooker, he can hit the person rescued, and then he can use all of his charges to catch up to the person if the person had BT. So you can hit a survivor fresh off the hook with your Chainsaw and catch up to them, unless they have some massive adrenaline or something, and hit them again. I think this is insane. I think his tunneling capabilities are maybe a little bit too strong. I don't know what's the best way to deal with this. In my opinion, maybe hitting a survivor that has borrowed time should immediately end all of your charges. Maybe. It is a very weird exception, and I don't know if there's a better idea, but something about this particular kind of gameplay I think should be considered. And if we remove the ultra face camping capabilities the skiller has, then maybe other things can be buffed and we would all be happier for it. Other than that, is there anything super wrong with Cannibal? No, he's a killer with a very, very single focused strength. He has insta down and he can shred through pallets. And that's it. He doesn't have any crazy mobility, he doesn't have any built-in information, he doesn't have any built-in slowdown. He just has a tool to break pallets and break survivors quick. And if survivors use windows effectively, and if they manage to make his chasing tool less useful, and his ability to pressure multiple survivors non-existent by spreading out, this killer goes from being super strong to being super weak, and that's awesome. Strengths, weaknesses, beautiful. His add-ons are a little bit weird. Most of them being pretty fine, some of them being really, really strange. For example, the carburetor tuning guide right now makes him ridiculously slow, which didn't happen when this add-on came out. I believe that is a bug, and wouldn't be surprised. And then we have two add-ons, the grease and the long guide bar, that allow the Cannibal to hold his chainsaw up for longer. There is no situation where this is ever necessary, so these two add-ons are completely worthless. If you want to make them more useful, make the Cannibal get one extra charge when he breaks, or not lose a charge when he breaks a pallet with this, and maybe he gets one extra when he breaks it with the grease. And that would be a similar style to the recovery add-ons, and it would serve a certain play style. So I think that would be cool. Give a purpose to these add-ons. Almost everything else, in one way or another, is fun, interesting, balanced, and whatnot. The yellow chili could honestly be green, and some rarity swaps could happen. The shop lubricant, for example, has no indication that it's working, so it would be really nice if this add-on had some indication when it works, or if it was just made simpler. But other than that, I think the Cannibal is quite okay. If you think he's really, really, really annoying to play against, it's mostly because they camp, and if you play him yourself, you'll see that it's really not that easy. There is a fairly, even though it's deceivingly simple in design, there's a fairly difficult skill curve to playing this killer perfectly and running around loops with your chainsaw and certain add-ons to catch survivors very, very tightly. So I can appreciate that, and I think it's mostly fine. The nightmare. It is honestly a nightmare to think about. This killer went from being underrated and somewhat okay, but very, very all over the place. And then he got reworked massively. And in this rework, he had a lot of really unfair things to him. He could hit people through BT and ignore it basically completely. He had a really, really strong anti-loop, or at least a very decent one. He had add-ons that slowed down the game on top of any perks that you would put on him. And obviously, as a result, he was the killer with the highest kill rate because he was very easy to play. And it really is very easy to play. You just go on a pallet, you put this, the game is slower. Now that has changed. He's gone several revisions. And I think his current state is a little bit better, but it's also quite sad. Let me try to explain why. His anti-loop has been made a bit worse. If you now use fake pallets, he has fewer pallets. Okay. If you now choose the dream snares, his snares make you a bit slower and you can't place as many. That's okay. And survivors can stay awake for longer if they use clocks. That's, in my opinion, alright. His slowdown add-ons have all been removed, which I guess is fine. So he's easier to balance. But the problem is, there's his add-ons are all worthless. His add-ons are completely worthless, and none of them are ever fun. We have the red paintbrush that makes everyone fall asleep immediately at the start and makes them have a harder time waking up. This is the only really good add-on, and almost anything else is a downgrade or just a horrible idea compared to this add-on. This add-on basically makes every survivor fall asleep for more time during the match, and if they are asleep more often, that also means that you can teleport around faster. The add-ons that allow you to teleport around faster might be some of the best, but they save you 1 to 2 to 3 seconds at most, which for a green add-on and for an ability that you're not constantly spamming, it's really not that big of a deal. Then we have the add-ons that make footsteps a little bit louder, but only if they're asleep. Not too terrible, but do you really need this? Then the add-ons that block the gates for 15 seconds, but only if they're asleep. Do you really want to wait for that? Then the add-ons that make them have a slightly louder grunt noise, but if they have Iron Will, it doesn't work. And then the add-on that makes the generators be heard from a little bit further, but only if the survivor working on the generator is asleep. Then we have the palette add-ons, which I think are a downgrade. The add-ons that only work if they miss kill checks. The add-ons that inflict blindness. This used to be a pretty big deal because people with optical obsession could see you through walls constantly. But now that's not that big of a deal, so making them blind, even though it's not bad, it's not great either. Then we have the add-ons that makes you a little bit harder to see and invisible to survivors that are asleep. As far as I know, completely worthless. The add-on that locks you in a teleport, it's a fun gimmick, but I don't think it's very strong. As we said, the add-ons that only work when they miss kill checks, and if they miss kill checks, they wake up, so you shouldn't really want them to miss kill checks in the first place, but whatever. What are the good add-ons that you run on this killer? Almost none. His base kit is fine, honestly, but his add-ons have been nerfed to oblivion to maybe compensate for the fact that this killer can do things that others cannot. The thing that makes this killer nice is that he's easy to play. Understanding how to use snares or pallets takes no time. It's very, very easy. You down a survivor, you look at the gen that you think they're doing, and you don't even need to look because, let's be real, you're probably going to be running Tinkerer, so... And then you teleport there, across the map, and even if it's a big map where other killers would struggle, you teleport immediately and now you use Pop, Ruin, whatever, and that gen doesn't get done. That's the real strength of this killer. If you want to make this killer a little bit more skill-based and make him a bit more dependent on the map and whatnot, there's a few things that I would suggest. Number 1. Make his teleport distance limited. Much like Hack cannot teleport across the entire map when a trap is triggered, this killer should only be able to teleport to generators within, let's say, 40 meters. That way, if a survivor takes you to the other end of the map, much like you would with any other killer, you need to ask yourself, hold up, do I really want to go to the other end of the map, or should I try to down them earlier? Should I try to corral them? It would have to make you question what you do a little bit more. That would be one of the changes. Almost every other change would be there to encourage him to just have more fun chases. Teleporting to generators right now makes a map-wide noise that all survivors can hear. It also is very frustrating when you teleport and you appear on a generator and you have no idea where you are because this change is so sudden. And this is something that with skill you can get better at, but it's still very, very annoying. So what would I do with the teleport? Have at least 1 or 2 add-ons to make the teleport faster. Make the teleporting noise completely silent unless you're literally at the generator and you can see it. And when you teleport, you literally see an aura of the projection that you're teleporting towards, so that you immediately can see which direction you'll be facing and you have an easier time adapting on the fly. And the point of this is to make Freddy be able to use his teleporting chases more. This is something that you can't do right now as Freddy, but survivors that have a brain will hear you do that and will avoid the generator, and for the most part, it's a bad idea. And it would be fun to use your teleport more in chase like that, and maybe less as a, okay, down, teleport, pop, down, teleport, pop, because, you know, that's really not all that impressive or fun or skill intensive. So if we do that and we maybe switch up some of the add-ons, that would be great. We could have another add-on that makes it so that when you teleport to a generator, survivors within 10 or 12 meters scream or have their aura revealed to you. That would be cool. That would definitely be better than some of the add-ons we have right now. One of them makes survivors bleed even if they're healthy. Why? So yeah, Lots of room for fun, interactive add-ons, and maybe change the way his teleport functions, and I think Freddy would be mostly alright. Next up, the pig. You know, I think the pig might be the first killer I give a 1-star to, just because you cannot do some of the things I'm gonna suggest right now with some quick numbers. I think this would require some major tweaks and considerations. So the pig has 3 main abilities, and all of them have some issue with them. She's got her stealth when she crouches. After a few seconds of being down on the ground, her terror radius collapses and she becomes stealthy. We have her ambush, which she can use it out of stealth or even in a loop to give her a bit of chasing potential. And then also she's got her reverse bear traps, which she's holding right now, that can slow down the game, or if the survivors are careless, they can even die to them. All of these abilities are either stupid or unfair. Now let's go with stealth. The stealth is tremendously slow. Now let's compare Amanda when she crouches to other killers that are in stealth mode. Myers in tier 1, he moves more than 100% of the speed. So, and he doesn't need to wait for the terror radius to disappear because he starts in tier 1. Already better than Amanda at catching someone off guard and getting a grab, perhaps. Ghostface moves at 115 without a terror radius, and he's not OP at all, and he can attack and lean and mark and grab someone immediately, and he's not OP in the slightest. Then we have Wraith, who moves at 150% while being cloaked, and can body block and can do a massive lunge out of it, and he's, in my opinion, also not tremendously OP. So why does the pig move at like 92% when you crouch? It is a disgustingly slow speed. It makes crouching a really bad idea. The better the pig that you watch is, the less you'll see them crouch. Typically, they only crouch when Discordance or Whispers or Barbecue or whatever perk tells them, okay, there's someone here for sure, because doing it in any other situation is too risky. You crouch, you move very, very slow, you waste a lot of time, gens might be being done across the map, then you find a survivor, and they had spine chill, so they run away. Even if you full spine chill, then they could have had sprint burst. They outrun you. And if you try to go for a quick ambush, you make a very, really loud animal noise. In my opinion, crouching should maybe be quieter, or at least the act of coming out of crouching should be delayed or quieter, so that survivors don't have such a head start if they hear you. I've been completely surprised by pigs, but because I hear the slink of the blade coming back, or because I hear the roar, I can just dead hard to a pallor or sprint burst away and be completely fine. And it feels really, really bad that a killer that has actually spent a bit of time ambushing you gets completely obliterated by that feature that they cannot control. So her speed should be higher, her noise cues should be lower, and if you are really crazy about this, now let's talk about the ambush. So the ambush also happens when you're crouched. You can crouch on the spot to make the ambush happen at a loop. And typically what happens is, if the loop is a bit unsafe and the pallet is already dropped and they're locked, or if you're on top of the pallet, you can use your ambush to get some hits that are difficult otherwise. Now, in most loops, the ambush does absolutely nothing. Even in unsafe loops, survivors can just keep running, and it's very frustrating. I don't think it would be a crazy idea to give Amanda's letter base good. When you crouch as a pig, seeing survivors that are 5 or 4 meters apart could be base good. The same way that Wraith has his add-on that does a similar thing. And that would make it harder for the survivor to be in full control, because you're very short and they just run away with the third person and you don't know what's happening. And if you don't have certain add-ons, you don't catch up. So giving her built-in aura would be pretty nice. Could be one of the nicer changes to make her ambush a little bit more threatening in chase. And that would be a way to not have to, you know, buff her ambush speed or anything like that super crazily. Alternatively, you could forget that idea and just make her ambush a little bit faster by default. Maybe it will work some of the add-ons that do that, or anything like that. And if her ambush was just a tiny little bit better, this killer would be really sweet. Now, of course, doing these buffs and then leaving her bird trap alone, I think would be a mistake. This is a killer that has a lot of little strengths that add up, and the bird traps, in my opinion, are very problematic in certain ways. Why are they problematic in certain ways? Without add-ons, the bird traps are mostly fine. It takes 2 minutes 30 for them to kill you in the worst case scenario, and you have plenty of time to do 4 searches. Typically not a big deal. The problem comes when a certain combination of 2 or 3 or 4 add-ons are in play. When you have the tamper timer and a certain other add-on, the creative gears, the jigsaw sketch, doing all 4 or 5 of your searches is literally impossible in some maps. Now you might be like, well, this is Saw, well, Amanda was corrupted, she wanted to kill people, she gave them unfair games. That's wonderful, but this is a video game, and I think that's really, really busted and unfair. And nobody feels good about being unlucky and not getting your search in the first 3 or 4 boxes and dying because it's the 5th one. I don't think any pig out there that's worth their salt thinks of themselves, wow, look at that. I run these 2 add-ons, 2 people died to their boxes, I did absolutely nothing other than catching them once. I might also be running other slowdown perks, so it's really hard for survivors to try to 99 gens, and they just died because they got unlucky. Wow, I am so good at this game. I think that's baffling. It is the kill rates for the pig are actually off the chart. She's one of those 2nd or 3rd highest kill rate killers in the game. And the reason why is because without slowdown perks, this killer can still slow down the game and win compared to other killers that are new. And with slowdown perks, this killer can really slow down the game and sometimes get free kills thanks to these add-ons and RNG. Now, against really good survivors that won't give you an easy down, the pig's chasing power is so pathetic that it might be even difficult to abuse this. But it really creates this dichotomy of the pig being either too weak or too strong. Similar to how Myers is really weak without add-ons, but with some add-ons, he can just murder a survivor that hasn't been hooked at 4 gens. So, in my opinion, make the searches of the boxes not kill you if you are mid-search. Or maybe pause the timer while you're mid-search. I don't know. Maybe pausing the timer would be given too much information, but you should not, point in case, a survivor that is actively trying to search all the boxes and is not even interrupted by the pig, we haven't even talked about being interrupted, should not die just because they're unlucky. I think that's horrible. If you nerf that one thing about the pig, make her other add-ons help the stealth, the ambush, and maybe the boxes a little bit more, and do the changes we did before, this killer would be a joy to play and a joy to play against, I am sure. Because otherwise, she's really, really fun and has a lot going for her. So, that aside, if you want to take it a step further, I also am a big proponent of normalizing her RNG. Right now, if you play the pig and you dish out 4 of these reverse bird traps on survivors, you might have games where all of them find them on the first search, and your power is almost useless. It delayed each of them 20 seconds, boo-hoo. Or they could also be very, very unlucky and have all of them find them on the 4th search. And that's basically the best power in the game then. How do you make this a little bit better? In my opinion, you could make it so that all 4 of her traps have different search requirements. Right now, the way it works is completely random. It could be 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and each person is completely random. The way I suggested, one person would get it on their 1st, another person would get it on their 2nd, another person would get it on their 3rd, and a final person would get it on their 4th. And it would be completely random. Maybe you get it on your 4th, and the 2nd person on their 1st, and the 2nd person, and the 3rd person on their 3rd, and so on. But on average, it would always be 2 to 3 searches. As opposed to, on average, it could be 1, or on average, it could be straight up 4. So if you could normalize her RNG, I think that would really, really show us just how strong the pig really is, and whether or not she needs to be buffed or nerfed after that. And I would be a big fan of seeing that in play. But either way, I think the other issues are even more important. Moving on to the clown. And you're gonna be very mad at me for this, but I think the clown is mostly fine. I love the clown. I think it's great. The rework that they did to him might just be one of the best reworks ever. Very underappreciated just how much layer of strategy and interesting gameplay his second bottles add to the game. Anytime I suggested changes for the clown in the past, I never really thought they would just give him a second type of bottle. So I really, really like it. Clown is great. He's got anti-loop. He can blur your vision and do some really crazy things. He can interrupt you during unhook, but also doesn't have the ability to just deny you unhooks. Which is something that I forgot to mention about the Doctor, by the way. The Doctor, if he shocks you continuously, I believe it's impossible to get unhooks. Luckily, the Clown doesn't have anything OP like that, but he's pretty nice. Now he has a yellow bottle that allows him to speed up. I mostly use this yellow bottle to close the gap if you really, really need to, or to use it in conjunction with the other bottle to make yourself better at loops. And there's a lot of fun, interesting back and forth where you can mess up and give the survivor speed if you don't play it right, or you can make it very hard for them to do anything if you play it correctly. And the fact that there's risk under word, I love that. Now, the issue remains with this killer. It's very, very, very hard to win in some matches where the 1v1 might be on your favor, but the 1v4 is not. If you spawn on a large map, let's say the Temple or the Sanctum of Wrath, and you have 3 survivors on 3 different gens, and you can only chase maybe one around one place, there is almost nothing you can do. Yellow bottles are not really going to cut it. You will need to down the survivor you're chasing extremely fast, and it's going to be hard because they'll pre-drop pellets, and then hope to God your perk can help you keep up. I don't think this is a problem necessarily with Clown. I think this is a problem with map design. Any map where the Clown can be really, really useless, it's just a map that is problematic by itself. So I think that if the overall map design of this game was brought to a closer standard, I think Clown would honestly be almost perfect. I still am not a huge fan of the insta-down pinky finger. I would probably remove this. I don't understand why it exists. Some of his other add-ons are honestly a little bit weird. For example, Spirit of Harshon makes the gas that's yellow bigger, and you never want the yellow gas to be bigger. In fact, you want it to be small, so it's just for you and no one else. So it would be really nice if this add-on, for example, made the yellow clouds turn yellow faster so that you can use them faster in chase and not have to wait for them to turn from white to yellow as slowly. So some of these add-ons that are maybe a little bit, could be reworked a little bit, but overall his add-ons are fun, interesting, and I think his power is quite fun and cool. As I said, the only major problem with him is just the inconsistencies of maps, where some of them you have a really, really good chance to use your perks and your power, and some of them, the moment you go into a slightly longer 1v1, the fact that he cannot be everywhere on the map, and the fact that he doesn't have any built-in insta-down, other than the add-on we discussed, of course, is a bit of a problem. So despite that, I still think he's mostly fine. Some minor changes, a bit more fair maps, I think Clown would be okay. Next up is Spirit. And I think Spirit is one of the killers that needs major changes. You could switch her add-ons up a little bit, change her values, and I think people would still complain. So I think bigger changes need to happen to this killer. Where to begin? This killer used to be super, super busted, even more so than she is right now. She used to have no vaulting animation, so if you saw a spirit on a window, she could be vaulting or she could be facing and right on top of you already. She also used to have collision with you while she was invisible. So she could be randomly going through an area and just bump into you and just the game basically telling her, okay, you're there. So that was an easy hit. Those two things have been changed. Awesome. Good job, Debs. But there are still many, many things that are wrong with her. She used to be able to use Strider to hear any survivor and track them really, really well. That's no longer a possibility because Iron Whale now makes Strider do absolutely nothing. So she needs to listen to footsteps a little bit more. That is a bit of a nerf, but still doesn't warrant some of the other things that she has going for her. Her base power is really, really strong. Her add-ons are just ridiculous. You have add-ons that allow her to recover her power faster, which are mostly fair. Add-ons that make her much, much quicker when she's using her power, much faster in velocity. And that's really bad because it's really hard for survivors to actually understand how fast she is in chase. And then there's duration add-ons that for the longest time have been bugged or unintentionally designed and also give recovery. So you could have an add-on to make you faster, an add-on to give you extra duration, and basically you're running 3 add-ons at once. It's quite disgusting. Her ultra rare mother-daughter ring also makes her insanely fast and basically has no real downside. So you can have a spirit that is incredibly fast or a spirit that is beyond incredibly fast. And you as a survivor, while she's using your power, you have no idea what's really happening because there's so few Qs. So how do we change this? First of all, duration add-ons are now changed so that they give you extra duration, but they don't give you extra recovery. I think that's a no-brainer. The Mother-Daughter ring, I don't know how it could be repurposed, but it also should probably go or be nerfed substantially in some way. Because right now it's definitely busted. It needs more of a downside. And the main issue with the spirit is the standing still mind game. A spirit that stands still, if you're nearby, you literally don't have any cues to know what she's doing. Some people are capable of seeing her animation reset, and some people can tell when she's using her power. And that's cute, if you're one of those comp survivors that can tell. But for almost everyone else, and even for those people, what happens exactly, you have no idea. Depending on her add-on, she could be here, 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 or already in America. Nobody knows, and it's very, very frustrating. My opinion for the longest time is that the spirit should have glimpses. When you are using the spirit's power, you as a killer, the moment you go into your phase, every, let's say, 1 or 1.5 seconds, every period of time, you should see a little flash on your screen, some visual cue. And that's telling you that you've left a glimpse. The survivors, when they are looking at your standing husk, they now see a little transparent glimpse of where you are at that moment. So that means that if a survivor is looking at you and you're coming from the right side, they're gonna see you on the right side or the left side, and they'll be able to react to that. But the nice, beautiful thing about the system is that while they have some time to react, you can also use this against them. There was another killer in the past, the original Freddy, that had basically this exact feature. And what the really good Freddys will do, the really, really good Freddys, they would go one way, show themselves glimpsing in one area, and then while they were invisible, they would go the other. So you as a spirit could go one way, show a glimpse, and then go the other. And it would be a lot more of a back and forth. Oh, what is she doing? What is she doing? What is she doing? Similar to how you see the nurse blink on top of you, and then you have to guess whether or not she's going to do a second blink or not. You would have an in-between point of reference to know, okay, the killer's here, but maybe she'll go in a straight line, or maybe she won't. What do I do? Do I want another pallet? That kind of back and forth would probably be a lot more fun to burst than what we currently have with Spirit, where she stands still and it's your guess as to what happens. The Spirit also doesn't move any grass and doesn't really give a lot of information. Her footsteps, I think, for a long time have been bugged and they don't play out. So maybe it wouldn't be a crazy idea to return some of those back, at least if we're not going to go with the glimpse idea. Change those things and I think the Spirit is probably okay. Some people suggest that the Spirit should not be able to hit immediately after coming out of phasing. I don't agree with this, because I think what would happen is every time you play against a Spirit, you would just camp a pallet and wait until she appears and then just drop the pallet from either side, and it would be very boring that you don't have to take any risk yourself. So I don't particularly agree with that idea. I would rather see the one I just suggested. And then Spirit would probably still be very, very strong, but not quite as hopeless as it is to go against now. Next up is Legion. Struggling to choose between 2 and 3 stars for Legion, quite honestly. I'm gonna give him 3. I think people don't realize that Legion have a lot of stuff going for them, and that it's a killer that needs to have weaknesses. Legion has normal movement speed. They're a rather short killer, so they can get away with some mind games in some places. They're not super, super loud like other killers, so it's not always easy to know where they're coming from. At any moment, they can begin a sprint that will make them vault pallets and windows very fast and able to keep up with survivors. They can also hit survivors and make them injured and have to deep wound, which means that if you lift that survivor, even if they have a medkit to heal in seconds, they still need to mend very slowly. And once you hit a survivor, you reset your speed. You reset your timer, which is 10 seconds, but can be more with add-ons. And you can see other survivors around you. So you have the ability to injure, the ability to stall with deep wound, the ability to gather information on other survivors and find them even in lockers and even hiding. That is a lot. That is a lot going for Legion. Just a few perks to support this kind of playstyle, and survivors typically will have a hard time if you're playing it right. However, the problem is that once you're done with this phase, and now you need to actually chase an injured survivor and down them, the Legion has nothing. Basically nothing. They don't have anything in chase other than the aforementioned being short. And it feels pretty bad if survivors just stay injured, they just beat up pallets, they have a safe map, and it's not super engaging. past that point. So, what would be the idea? I think part of me wants to, obviously, you know, see Legion be super cool and have other abilities. Like some people suggest crazy things, like all 4 Legion members being in the map. But if I'm realistic, I think Legion is quite okay, and it's not far from being balanced if this is your kind of playstyle. First of all, Legion needs to be encouraged to hit multiple people a little bit more and rewarded for doing so a little bit more. Some people have suggested that for every person that you hit, your cooldown should be shorter. I like that. I think that would be really, really smart. Some people have suggested that for every person that you hit, you become faster. I think that could be a bit overwhelming in some small maps where Legion is just hitting, and, you know, slowing things down a lot with Thanato and whatever. But I like the idea of encouraging, in some way, hitting multiple survivors, more so than right now. The one thing about Legion that really, really grinds my gears, that I really, really hate, is that when you hit a survivor, that survivor has no collision with you for many, many seconds. So you can hit a survivor, the survivor can do something really stupid and get themselves in a corner, and when you try to body block them, they go right through you. I dislike this. I also really dislike that the Legion has a 4-second cooldown, and this 4-second cooldown happens no matter what. That's maybe one of the worst feelings about Legion. If you hit a survivor and you miss, 4-second cooldown. If you hit a survivor and they're out of the mending, 4-second cooldown. If you cancel your power, 4-second cooldown. And this feels pretty bad. And the add-ons to decrease the cooldown are absolutely pathetic, with the strongest one removing 0.6 out of 4 seconds. Very, very little. It also comes to the point where you can lunge to get a little bit of extra distance because the cooldown is the same. So it feels kind of weird that you're encouraged to miss your attacks. I think it's strange. I think your cooldown should be different if you cancel it. Maybe it should be lower, especially after you've hit multiple survivors, than if you miss. It would also be really, really nice if canceling your Legion Feral Frenzy immediately gave you your body blocking abilities back. If I could hit a survivor and immediately cancel to body block them a pallet after I beat them to it, that's their mistake. That's like a Wraith running in front of you, blocking a window, and you go in there like a headless chicken, not realizing what's happening. There's counterplay to that if you're smart. But if you let yourself be fooled, they will body block and down you. The Legion currently cannot do that because of the aforementioned seconds of being able to go through you because they lose their collision. So being able to use your power from Frenzy to body blocking and potentially getting it down, I think would be really, really interesting. And after that, and some minor changes to some of the really, really silly add-ons that we have right now, I think Legion would be fine. What are some of the silly add-ons that we have right now? This add-on gives you a 100% super annoying terror radius and makes you break pallets. And obviously, as a result, lets you find everyone. And I don't know. And then we have an add-on that is immediately below in rarity that does absolutely nothing. Basically, what you're gonna see with Legion players is they run duration add-ons, they run maybe recovery add-ons, and maybe some other ones to slow down a little bit, and that's it. I think this is a little bit sad. I think Stat Bloom Study maybe should reward you for hitting the same survivor twice. Maybe they drop their item if you hit them twice. Perhaps you could have this add-on completely removing or some other add-on removing the penalty. Right now, when you hit a survivor with your basic attack, you lose half of your power, which is really baffling. I don't understand why it happens. You also don't see scratch marks while using your power, which again is okay, but it's a little bit crazy considering what other killers can do. So some of those small weaknesses I feel could be filled in with some of the add-ons that currently do basically nothing and are very outdated. And after that, I think Legion is mostly okay. Plague. Plague, in my opinion, is very, very fine. My problems with Plague are very, very minor. I think she's actually one of the best designed killers in the game and is an example of what other killers should aspire to. She is very strong. I think almost everyone would agree, but she's also not unbeatable. She has a particular strength, countering medkits and certain things, but also has a particular weakness, or if she gets stunned, she loses her power, and so on. And overall, for everything she's very good at, there's a counterpart to it. Her add-ons are also pretty great. Her iridescents are interesting and powerful. Her purples are somewhat challenging. Her greens are good. Her yellows are good. Her browns are okay-ish, and they all scale really well, as opposed to other killers where they have 2 add-ons that you want to run and literally nothing else. She also is a killer that has a bit of basic attack, basic killer chasing, but also has a really crazy limited time ability that rewards you for being better and being creative. I love it. What are my problems with the Plague? If you don't have cooldown add-ons, even if you have cooldown add-ons, her power feels incredibly sluggish. You walk in a straight line and you try to puke quickly on a generator, and you'll see just how slow you become, how slow you charge, and how slow you are for the cooldown. I think her base speed should be a little bit better. Overall, she shouldn't lose as much momentum. It really feels like you just walk through a wall when you just tap your M2. There's also the very annoying issue that when you tap your M2 to use your power, if you miscalculate it by a little bit, it's bad. If you don't fully charge your power to a certain threshold, she will swallow her own puke, which is uncomfortable. And if you do it for too long, you will take longer than you need for a quick one. So it would be really, really nice if she was a little bit like Huntress, and tapping M2 lets you just throw the fastest hatchet possible, as opposed to cancelling itself and giving you the cooldown. Mechanically, that's my problem with Blight. There's also the incredibly annoying feature where sometimes you hit a survivor with your puke, and they literally go, and then they're not infected. I don't understand why this happens. I think it's a server-sided thing, where in your screen you hit them, but in their screen they did not. But I've also seen survivors on their own screen cough and not get infected. I'm not gonna lie, that is the most upsetting thing ever. But I'm sure it could be fixed if the source of the issue was found. Another thing that also happened recently is that her fountains make, when you drink from them, your whispers, the sound is incredibly loud, much like doctor levels of like getting in your head. I don't understand why this happens. Just reduce the sound by 50%. And that's okay. Some maps have the issue where the fountains can spread on the edges of the map, mostly swamp maps, basically swamp maps, and that's really uncomfortable, but that's an issue with those maps, not necessarily with the killer. So we're gonna skip that. For the most part, everything else about her power is great, perfect, amazingly balanced. Some of her add-ons are weird. Some of her add-ons are just strange. But for the most part, almost all of them do something useful, and almost all of them are worth bringing. It's a bit strange that the apples are so much better than some of the other add-ons, but almost every add-on fits some kind of playstyle and something. The duration add-ons could be increased a little bit, but again, even if they never touch these add-ons, they would still be some of the best add-ons this game has to offer. So overall play, good job. If you're going to touch her, please only to do some of those things we mentioned and not anything else. Next up, Ghostface. Ghostfaces are fine. Let's get the most obvious thing out of the way. Revealing Ghostface for some people is a wildly inconsistent thing. I don't understand the technicalities of this. I understand that Ghostface has a hitbox, and if you stare at it with the center of your screen, you reveal him if you look at him from a second. But there's these incredibly baffling clips that you'll find out there of people literally staring into the soul of this killer and not revealing him. And I don't understand. I don't understand why that happens sometimes. So any consistency improvements to that would be very welcome. I've also heard that people with stretch resolution can have a technically bigger hitbox in their camera, and they can reveal you from larger tiles. I don't know how much truth there is to this, although many people seem convinced that it worked. I would also like to see that go. That seems really, really stupid. But other than these mechanical issues, that is just part of, the code that we don't really understand, that could be improved, but might be also be very difficult. Other than these mechanical issues, gameplay-wise, what's up with Ghostface? I think it's awesome. I think it's great. It's one of the killers that really came out in a horrible state in the PTB, but then somehow was put together into a really good state. The one thing that really, really bothers me, however, is the state of his add-ons. I think that if we ignore the add-ons, I think he's got fair strengths, fair weaknesses, and he's mostly okay. But it's the add-ons and what they do to his gameplay that really depress me. Now, he has basically 4 good add-ons and everything else is horrible. There is the Wild Eyes Matchbook, the Address Book, and the Shoot Pen that make you get your stealth power faster. And then maybe things like the other security camera, which gives you a bit of information. It's kind of like a barbecue and chili. And maybe the night vision binocular and the other add-ons to help you stalk a little bit faster. Some of these add-ons can be okay. But typically, you want to run 1 or 2 recovery add-ons. Because recovery is incredibly important no matter how well or bad you're doing. If you are a new Ghostface and you're getting revealed all the time, then you want to have your power back quicker. If you're a hit and run Ghostface and you want to lose your terror radius to hit and run, then you want to have your power back faster. If you want to stalk people and lean stalk them and 99 them, when you do, you want to have your power back faster. If you hit a survivor and you lose your power in any circumstance, when you hook them and you go for someone else, you want to have your power back faster. In every single situation, you want to have your power back faster. Always. Always a good idea. And the fact of the matter is that without add-ons, it takes 30 bloody seconds to get your power back. That's a disgrace. How can it take 30 seconds to get your power back? Even if you get revealed, or even if you make the best Ghostface play of the century. To me, there should be a dynamic recovery system, much like Legion. Legion has to recover his power over, what, 20 seconds? And if he hits someone, it's only half of that. Stuff like that, right? And if he hits someone, he gets his power back. Ghostface should be exactly the same. If you get revealed, 30-second cooldown. If you do a silent stab on someone, which is hitting them while you're cloaked, maybe 25-second recovery. If you do a complete mark and stab, you get your power back in 20 seconds. And maybe add-ons increase or decrease these numbers by some amount. That's it. Make it so that he's playing him well is more exciting and more rewarding, as opposed to just needing add-ons to carry you. That is the major issue with Ghostface. Another thing I forgot to mention is that since dedicated servers, leaning is a really clunky feeling. Before dedicated servers, you would find a tree or a wall and you would lean immediately. Now, when you do that, the server has to check that you are on a leanable position. So many times, I get on a wall, I start to lean, it cancels, and then I need to lean again. I've wasted half a second on a lean, and now that survivor's getting away. Also extremely annoying. I'm not even going to go over his other add-ons. Please watch my add-on video if you want to have them all broken down. But out of his 20 add-ons, I'm pretty sure a solid 12 of them are so embarrassingly bad that they could generally use a complete overhaul. If we consider that, you could almost give this killer a 1 star, but it's honestly just some of these add-ons, some of his base kit, and he's okay. Next up is Demogorgon. Demogorgon had his power recently rearranged a little bit, his add-ons reworked a little bit. For the most part, I think that brought him to a really good state. Now, the developers, again, failed to realize that even though this killer has tracking, teleporting, and chasing powers, chasing being anti-pallet and, you know, the shred, the most important one is the shred. So obviously, the brown and yellow add-ons that affect the shred and the pallet breaking were by far the best add-ons. So it's kind of crazy that we are in the situation again where the best add-ons are brown and yellow. The developers nerfed those add-ons to make up for it. I wish that had been they had a bit more of foresight into that. But that aside, what's the demo like now? He's almost perfect. Has a killer. It's a killer with some mobility if you plan around it well. It's a killer with some stealth and tracking if you use it well. It's a killer that can hit in most loops of the game and can zone out people quite well, but also can mess himself and fall for baits if you're not careful. It's a killer that can shred through pallets but not unfairly get rid of them or anything like that. Fair counterplay, fair chances for you to outplay others. I think he's almost perfect, honestly, and he would be one of the killers that I would touch the least. The only thing that saddens me about him, which is not really related to him, is his perks. Some of them are still really sad and bad, but if we don't consider that part of the killer, I think he's mostly fine. What would I change about him? Wouldn't be a crazy idea if when he's undetectable, his stomping was a bit quieter. Maybe that would give a bit of oxygen for the people that like that sort of playstyle. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's totally fine. Maybe there are some ideas that you could come up with to make him better, but why fix something that's not broken, right? Yeah, I think it's great. Oni. What do we compare this killer to? In my opinion, I think it's mostly fine. When this killer came out in the PTB, he was busted. Then they nerfed him a bunch, and now they unnerfed him. I think it's very, very good. They've found a really good balance with him. It is a bit strange that some of his add-ons are so powerful. One in particular, the Scalp Top Knot, is kind of insane. It makes his power charge up twice as fast and makes him actually so much more of a threat in almost every loop when he's using his power, to the point where not using it and using it is almost a complete different killer. They should do the same thing they did to combat straps with Pick back in the day. Nerf the add-on, but make the base kit higher. Some of his other add-ons are still also a little bit weird, and this killer honestly has space to have cooler add-ons. We have add-ons, for example, that increase, there's a yellow one, that increases your passive ability to get your power. And your passive ability takes you like 6 years to get your power. It's a worthless piece of add-on. So some of the more useless add-ons, obviously, I would like to see rework. But for the most part, this killer is perfectly fair, perfectly good. The only thing that I would like to see is more of a reward for slugging less. It would be really nice if picking up a survivor in Blood Fury would drop 3 blood orbs or 5 blood orbs or something nice to reward you to keep using your power, as opposed to just, you know, build up your power, slug, win the game. Hope they don't have Unbreakable. Minor considerations like that aside, I think Oni is in a very, very good state. Almost anyone would argue that he's good, but not unfair, so I love that. Next is Deathslinger. Again, some people that really, really dislike the fact that his gun is so fast would have you go through the idea that it should be like Huntress. You should need to aim for 5 seconds before you can shoot, and blah blah blah, because there's no room to dodge. It's a difficult killer to go with. I'm gonna give him a 2 in that it needs changes. This is a killer with a very oppressive 1v1, but despite having a slowdown, because he inflicts deep wound, he really is not incredible in the 1v4. His gun, as much as some people like to pretend otherwise, has a tiny hitbox and is not reliable to use at long distances. Survivors can do absolutely nothing and you might still miss. So what mostly comes out of playing this killer is getting very close, zoning out a survivor and hitting them when they're in animation, maybe hitting them over a window if you need to, blah blah blah. I think that if survivors are okay with playing against a killer that has strengths and weaknesses, this killer is not a horrible deal. If you want to rework this killer so that he's incredibly engaging and incredibly, gives incredible opportunities on both sides in the 1v1, that would be okay. But then his utterly weak 1v4 would be horrible. So I think the killer overall is okay. And you as a survivor, it's a bit like Legion. You need to understand that in some places you're gonna get hit. But after you're hit and he needs to reload, or after he misses and you need to reload, what do? You don't bring him close to your teammates, you bring him away, you don't give him opportunities to make you have to deep wound and waste time. I think that's part of gameplay and I think that's completely fair. That being said, what are the problems with this killer? He can aim immediately and stop aiming immediately, and there is absolutely zero cooldown or almost no slowdown, and you as a survivor have to just guess when he's going to shoot. It really wouldn't be a crazy idea to make him have to aim for like a fraction of a second before shooting. But even if you don't want to do that, if he aims and stops aiming, that should be some kind of cooldown. His ability to zone out for free without basically doing anything is a little bit annoying, truth be told. So that could be a thing where if you as a Deathslinger don't commit to a shot, and you don't actually want to shoot and just put your gun down, you are slowed down for a second. You cannot shoot for the next half a second or something like that. To make up for some of this, I would really like to see this killer reload his gun automatically every time he hooks someone. That would maybe help the wasted empty time he needs to reload in between chases, and would encourage him to be precise with his shots and get his 1v1 and down survivors as efficiently as possible. I feel a bit weird about his ability to basically have no terror radius and shoot you from outside of his terror radius with monitor and abuse. His music is really, really quiet. Maybe that could be looked into. Although I don't think it's like a tremendously big issue. A larger issue perhaps is the fact that some of these add-ons are really weird. For example, you have an add-on that makes you faster while you hold your gun. But for the most part, you are going to hold your gun for like half a second, if that. There's no real reason to just hold your gun forever or for a long time, so these add-ons are worthless. The add-ons that make his territory smaller while he holds the gun are also not super useful or good. And some of these iridescents don't really live up to what they're supposed to do. Yeah, I feel these add-ons could scale up a little bit better. Some of the changes we discussed could be there, and I think he would be more okay. But I still have a feeling that some people would not like that. Maybe that's just a personal thing. The Executioner. This killer's weird. This killer is just weird. When he came out, I honestly thought he was more balanced than he is now. He had some incredibly good strengths. Horrible add-ons. And was a very, very serious threat when close to you. Basically, the Pyramidhead could put his sword down, and if you were very close, he could immediately just hit you, like with a basic attack. And if you went through a pallet, a window, he could just use his range attack to hit you through basically anything. But the trade-off was that his cooldown was very large, so if he missed, he actually had a good chance to get away. What the developers did was like, okay, we don't like this idea. He's not going to be able to hit you from up close. He cannot cancel the M2 into M1. But we're just going to give him a shorter cooldown. And that, I think, is kind of annoying. I think it encourages Pyramid Heads to just, you know, get you to a loop, zone you out, and then zoom, I miss, zoom, I miss, zoom, and spam it. And the thing is, even if they hit you, because their cooldown is the same if they hit or miss, they're probably going to get a second hit on you before you can loop anywhere and get anywhere if you're corralled. So I don't like the idea of encouraging this killer to just miss a bunch of times. His add-ons that used to be incredibly horrible are also today incredibly horrible. There's been no changes to them. His perks are also really sad, but that's a topic for another day. So what's the deal with him? I think that this killer should be able to hit out of his M2. It shouldn't be a lunge, but it should be at least a basic attack without a lunge. If you have a survivor right in front of you while you put down your sword and you slow down yourself, which by the way is now slower, it feels kind of stupid that a survivor that's in front of you, you cannot hit them. Unlike Nemesis, you cannot quickly cancel and hit. And unlike other killers that have the option to hit up close very, very well, Huntress, for example. If you're up close with Huntress, she can hit you no problem. This killer is incredibly awkward to control and hit someone nearby. I think all in all, he's balanced because his weaknesses are offset by his few but really fucking crazy strengths. Basically the ability to bypass DS, BT, all the hook perks and tunnel you quickly, and the ability to hit you basically in any loop, and there's some crazy things through walls. That being said, I still feel like he's a bit like Plague. Before, when I played this killer, I would spawn in the map, I would go towards what I think survivors are, and on the way I would put down my sword quickly and leave some trails. Because then the survivors would maybe run back and have to deal with the trails. Right now, that is a horrible idea, or at least it feels horrible, because every time you put down your sword for even a second, you have this very clunky slowdown that the developers forced to make sure that you cannot do any crazy cancels into attacks. So that makes me a bit sad. I wish he felt less clunky, and I wish his add-ons, which some of which are fine, don't get me wrong, there's like 3 or 4 that I would keep, but almost every other add-on is so bad. Like, for example, this this Scarlet Egg that makes survivors more visible when they step on your trails. Or this add-on that makes them bleed more on the ground when they're already very easy to track if they are tormented. Or this add-on that does basically nothing. Yeah, the add-on situation on this killer, I could talk about it for 5 hours. Horrible. So change that and he's mostly okay. Blight. Blight, I think, is mostly okay. Much like Nurse, he's a killer that's completely busted, really, really powerful, ignores many of the conventions of the game, but not all of them. And he needs skill. Some weird collision things aside, for the most part, playing this killer is a show of your skill. using it well will require you to understand the maps well, to understand what you can collide on, to understand how you can flake around corners. And if you get beaten by a Blight, it should be a pretty good feeling of like, wow, this guy really knows what he's doing. Problem is, much like Spirit, his add-ons kind of take it a bit too far. You have add-ons that are very easy to use, that make him considerably faster. Add-ons that make him able to catch up to you immediately after hitting you again with no penalty. Add-ons that let him shred through pallets way quicker. Add-ons that show your aura so that, you know, some of these are fine. All of them, all in all, are a little bit overwhelming. For the most part, I think the really, really crazy add-on is the Alchemist Ring. The add-on should be an iridescent, and even then it should be nerfed. There is no chance that you will get away from a Blight that hits you with his power. You use your speed boost and he's out on your butt. So basically what you will see with this killer, for the most part, is just people running this, you know, very strong perks which work really well on him, the strongest possible add-on, the strongest possible second add-on, and maybe send themselves to a map of their choosing. And that feels, I'm not gonna lie, that feels pretty bad. This add-on should probably be looked at. Some of these other add-ons are okay, and maybe they could be rarity swapped, and he would be alright. He would just be a strong skill, you know, a skill-intensive killer, and he would be fine. Just remove some of the add-ons and make the other add-ons a bit more appealing so that you don't have to see the same 2 or 3 add-ons used every single match. That's probably the most annoying thing about Blight. Otherwise, though, one of the better design killers they've come up with. Twins. There's some things about this killer that just don't feel right. I feel like the developers have identified issues and corrected them in all the wrong ways. So let me give you an example of what's wrong with Twins. You hook a survivor in the middle of the map, and you try to leave Victor next to it. You can't. You cannot separate from Victor or even switch to Victor when you're close to a hook, so that you cannot camp it. That's a good thing. However, if you're in the basement, for some odd reason, you can be right next to the hook and still separate from Victor. And if you place Victor on the hook before hooking, you can also get away with that. So why? Why? They need to make a more consistent approach to how hooks and Charlotte and Victor work. If you have Victor next to a hook and you hook a survivor on it, Victor should immediately kick the bucket, die, and reappear at your flesh at the earliest rate available. Bam. Then you fix the issue with Victor camping hooks. Then we have the issue of Victor slugging. Victor is a tremendously good tool to slug survivors. You hit one, you hit another, and since you can keep them injured, it's really powerful. So what they did to prevent this is make Victor have the longest cooldown in existence in God's green earth, and it feels horrible. If you try to slug a survivor, you are now forced to sit through like 7 seconds of waiting before you can switch back to Charlotte. So you start your charge, you down a survivor, and then you have like a 5 or 6 second cooldown during which you can be kicked, and then a 1 second cooldown or so to wake up from Charlotte and regain your speed. It feels so bad. It feels what I described of Plague and Pyramidhead before being sluggish. This is that on steroids. It feels horrible. In my opinion, when you down a survivor, if you press the switch ability, you should have the ability to immediately switch back to Charlotte. Now, if you want to be a slugging Victor and you want to down and then go for someone else, then yes, then go through the cooldown. Then by all means, long cooldown. But the ability to switch back and actually hook survivors should not be penalized every time you down someone. It feels genuinely horrible to play. Another thing that's quite upsetting, I suppose, about this killer is how the game expects survivors to get rid of Victor. Let me show you some of the add-ons. Survivors who remove Victor suffer from the hemorrhage status effect. Survivors who remove Victor suffer from the broken status effect. And then there's this add-on that makes them take longer to remove Victor. Guess what? Survivors should never remove Victor. If they're smart, they're gonna keep on Victor for 30 seconds or so before you can call him back. And just relocate or be chased or waste time a little bit so that you do not get to use your very strong Victor on someone else. So they will keep him hostage for at least a little bit. So all of these add-ons are worthless. And much of the gameplay that you could do around them is completely lost because survivors will literally hold him hostage. I think this is really sad. I think these add-ons should be reworked to do something else. And I think you should be encouraged to play differently. It's also very crazy to me how Victor reappears so quickly no matter what. If you yourself kill Victor on purpose, he appears in like 5 seconds. If the survivors kick Victor, he appears in like 5 seconds. If you get Palestine, he appears. Why? If Victor is murdered by the survivors and kicked, he should take longer to reappear. And if you yourself kill him passively or something else, then he should reappear at the current rate, which is very, very fast. And maybe add-ons could be created to help you in some way or another around these numbers, instead of some of the truly abysmal and horrible add-ons that we have right now. That alone would help a lot, encouraging the killer to not slug, encouraging the killer to not camp, and not punishing you for just playing the killer right. I think would be a great step for this killer. That's mostly it, I believe. Is there anything else about this killer that's just kind of wrong? I believe that's it. It's mostly, I think the most frustrating thing that you have with them right now, bugs aside, is the fact that downing a survivor and playing the killer the way it's intended, it's just not possible. The way the game intends you to play is expecting survivors to remove Victor, which they don't. And it also expects you to slug, but maybe you don't want to. So you have to go through that 6 or 7 second cooldown, which just feels horrible on a killer that's already very sluggish as it is. So yeah, if I saw those things change, I think I would enjoy them more, and so would everybody else. Trickster. He's gone through a lot of changes, and he would have gone from... I think he went from a killer that really had a lot of things wrong with him to now a killer that only has some things wrong with him. His main issue, the main weakness of this killer right now is the fact that tall structures and tall buildings make his power very, very hard, and he has nothing else to back it up. Now, if you're the Huntress, you have a similar issue. If a survivor runs you really well around a tall building, you might have very few windows of opportunity to get a hatchet in. But if you manage to somehow find the opportunity to hit them with a hatchet, that's it. You hit them with a hatchet and they're down, or they're dead, or they're injured. With Trickster, that's not enough. You need to continuously fire at them and chase them for prolonged times. Luckily, the decay meter is now a little bit slower. I think they're on a decent pace. It might be that this killer needs to be 115 and his other speeds need to be adjusted, but I can see why they are reluctant to do that. This killer is incredibly good at downing survivors in the open, much like Cannibal, and incredibly good at stopping survivors on the track at certain things. If you're camping a survivor on the hook and someone else approaches, you can start pelting them with knives and there's nothing they can do. And if you're good with the knives and you manage them well, despite having a smaller inventory of knives now, I think it's quite good. I think he's quite strong. He's just one of those killers that's strong at one thing and very weak at another. So it wouldn't be a crazy idea to see his base speed be increased so that he's a little bit more consistent across the board. But even if that wasn't the case, I think Trickster is mostly okay. I still feel like his main event shouldn't force you to automatically throw knives. I still feel like you should be able to stop and move faster. Main event now, you get it so few times during the match, and it's so hard to make use of it unless survivors are already in a bad spot. So yeah, I would like to see that be changed a little bit, and some of his more useless add-ons, there's a few that I think are kind of bad, be adjusted. But for the most part, I think he's okay. Next up is Nemi. What to say about Nemi? After playing him a lot more, I think I understand him a little bit better. My initial impression of this killer, I think, has improved overall, to the point where I would tell you that he's mostly fine, because the changes that he needs are, in my opinion, not that crazy hard to implement. The main issue with Nemesis that I think most of you will agree with me on is the fact that his zombies are wildly inconsistent. Wildly inconsistent. We're talking from being able to win your games to just getting stuck on a tree in a corner of the map and being there the entire match. So being basically useless. Better AI needs to be implemented. If a zombie isn't able to leave a place where they're stuck, they should just die and respawn immediately elsewhere. I'm a big fan of the idea that we should get 3 or 4 zombies at the start of the match, but only 2 of these zombies respawn. So survivors would need to early on waste 1 or 2 pallets to get rid of 1 or 2, and then the other 2 stay, and those do respawn. It would help. It would help with the feeling of a horde that you're fighting against, and you need to kill some of them. I think that would be awesome, but I think the developers are not very keen on having more than 2 zombies for whatever technical reason. So that might never come to be. Moving away from zombies, if they're a bit more consistent, that'll be great. Now we come to Nemi. Some people have suggested the idea that Nemesis should have a left control or active ability button to just go scream, much like the female Titan in Attack on Titan, to attract the zombies nearby. I would love that. I think that being able to attract zombies to you would be a cool idea. Again, I don't think it's super necessary, but it would be really, really nice feature to have. Another thing that the zombies could just do is just be more aware of survivors that are in chase, or at least of survivors that are infected. Right now, infected survivors are not targeted by zombies more than any others, so zombies having a bit more of a smart AI to them to help you use them in chase, as opposed to just having a passive annoyance to survivors, I think that would be great. But by no means is the most important part. The important part is their own consistency in not getting stuck in places, in my opinion. Now, when we move to the Nemesis himself, he starts in tier 1, he gets to tier 2, then he gets to tier 3. The changes to tier 3 lately, in my opinion, are nothing. Tier 3 is just the extra meter, and that's pretty good. The real power of Nemesis is tier 2. Being able to kill pallets and zone out survivors and break breakable walls immediately is actually super good, and the more you play him, the more you will understand. He does have a very tiny hitbox, and this will be incredibly frustrating when you start playing him. I know it was for me, but it's something that you can get used to, and I think it's a plus to him that you'll appreciate as you get better and better with him. So I actually wouldn't even change the hitbox, even though when I started playing him, I always thought that maybe the hitbox should be wider at the start, so it's easier to hit survivors. That's something I've changed my mind on. One thing that's kind of weird about Nemesis is how there's one add-on that is just so much better than everything else. Let me show you. So this add-on makes survivors expose when they open a vaccine, but if they never get infected, or if they open the vaccine and use them far away, it's basically useless. This add-on removes a case from the child, which is pretty good, but it can also be useless if you don't get infected. This add-on does something good, but it does it so little that it's useless. There's a lot of add-ons that are kind of weird and are very situational. But then there's Marvin's Blood. Marvin's Blood is so good. I don't understand why this is not a purple add-on. It should be a purple add-on, and it should be replaced with the Nemesis Alpha Parasite or something else. It's stupid good. If you hit one survivor and you hit them again, you are now in tier 2 and you are a chasing machine immediately. Without this add-on, you need to hit at least 2 different survivors to get to tier 2 early on, or kill a bunch of zombies. So this add-on is incredibly game-changing, and I think its strategy should be upgraded, or the effect of it should be reconsidered, because right now it makes a big difference playing with it. Some of the other add-ons I think are okay-ish. I honestly would like to see the design of this one, for example, be changed a little bit, but for the most part, he's actually kind of fine. Really kind of fine. When you play him well and you understand his hitbox and how it works really well, we have the 50 wins in a row video if you want to watch that, where I explain it more visually. When you get to that level, you understand that Nemesis is actually quite a threat. And the only thing that remains, the only thing that's really annoying, is the fact that you have to hit survivors 3 times. Now, the developers have explained that in the original Nemesis prototype, when you hit a survivor with your tentacle, they didn't get any speed boost, and that was horrible. It was like unplayable. It was like really, really bad. I'm gonna take their word for it, but I also think that the current one is really bad. So I think that when you hit a survivor, they should definitely, no matter what, get a shorter speed boost than what you do right now. If you play on a small map, it's not that big of a deal. On large maps, having to hit survivors 3 times is an absolute chore. And your zombies are not going to hit survivors all that often for you if the survivors are decent. So remove the slowdown, change the add-ons a little bit, make sure the AI of the zombies is a bit more reliable, and you have an excellent, perfectly rounded, fun killer, in my opinion. And next, we have the Cenobite. the final killer. I'm gonna say this killer is mostly fine. Right now, he has a really annoying bug with his lunge that makes playing him a bit of a pain. But I think all of what this killer brings to the table is actually quite brilliant. He's a killer that can quickly gather information by using his teleporting portals and peeking across the map. He's a killer that can easily slow down survivors by forcing them to find the box and solve it, and if not, janking them off generators, so he has a bit of a passive slowdown. And he has a power that's pretty impactful in chase. And of course, the most important of all three of these is the chasing power. And of course, the more broken out of all these is the chasing power, and that's the main issue and why he needs a bit of change. So his chasing power basically works like Nurse. You place a portal, which works exactly like Nurse teleport, and then you shoot at a survivor, and if you catch them, more chains appear, slow them down, gives you a hit. It slows them down around loops. You can catch up to them in the open a little bit. Problem with this power is the fact that the chains can break insanely quickly. Some people have suggested that the chains should be like Deathslinger chains, and when you have an obstacle, they just break faster. So instead of breaking immediately and then reappearing, which is awkward, they don't break as immediately. I am a fan of this idea. At least the original chain that you hit them with, I think, should have this property. Right now, playing this killer, bugs aside, feels really bad and really inconsistent sometimes, because you do the exact same play on the exact same survivor on the exact same spot, and sometimes it results in exactly what you want, and sometimes it does absolutely nothing, and you have no way of knowing whether the chains are going to be useful or not sometimes. There is a skill component to it, but it's not always easy to predict and not always predictable in the first place. So, in my opinion, that should probably change. Being able to chaining a survivor should be a lot more impactful and non-RNG dependent than it is right now. Some people think that solving the cube should take a little bit longer, so this is to teleport, so that survivors don't solve the cube while you're hooking someone. I think that's fair game. I think that's part of the game. It's a little bit strange, for example, that you have 4 add-ons. Let me point them towards you. Frank's Heart, as well as Larry's Blood, as well as Flickering Television, and as well as Liquefied Gore. No, sorry, as well as Boiled Meal. So these 4 add-ons make it so that you can hit survivors further with your chain. The problem is, there's absolutely no reason ever to do that. Never, ever should you go out of your way to hit a survivor super far in chase. That's just not how it works. The only 2 reasons to do this is to see from further, and I don't think it's even that good of an idea every time with these add-ons, and also to interrupt survivors on totems and the like. That can be good about these add-ons. Maybe they should stay, but the point is, there's no reason to hit survivors from afar. You are a short to mid-range killer, and I think you should be stronger at that. That being said, there is one add-on called the Engineer's Fang that completely changes this. The Engineer's Fang makes it so that when you hit a survivor with your chain, the first time, if they're healthy, you don't chain them, you just immediately injure them. This add-on is incredibly strong, incredibly powerful. It literally has no downsides, because after you hit them, you can now use your power normally. Someone did a suggestion that I think is really cool, which would be to make this add-on base kit, but only during chain hunt. So what that would mean would be that you have your normal power, which, as we say, could be a bit more consistent, which is fairly strong. But if the survivors ignore the box, or let you pick it up or anything like that, then you have this add-on. You can injure survivors with your first chain, as long as the box is acting up. I think that would give this killer a crazy amount of power, and it could be a little bit scary if people would do this with, you know, with pranks like Hoarder, Franklins, and whatnot. But I would like to see some form of that. I think this add-on right now is very awkward in that not having it and having it is a big gap. This add-on is really powerful, and it's by far the strongest. So I would like to see it nerfed in some way, but also see the base kit increase in some other comparable way. What exactly that could be, you honestly could help me out in a comment, because I'm not very sure. I'm also a huge fan of the greasy black lens, where it shows you the aura of survivors that are speared by the hooks, so that you can actually mind get them at loops. Now, this is one of the best add-ons, because almost trying to mindlessly charge at a survivor and breaking your own walls, your own chains, is really bad. So with this add-on, you have that alternative gameplay aspect. I would like this add-on to be base kit as well, but if the chains were more predictable and a bit more impactful and less likely to immediately break, I think that this add-on could stay a good add-on as opposed to being base kit. So I think I would be okay with that. I am alright with this killer breaking his own chains. I think that's okay. It is a bit awkward that in some maps you have no choice, but I think that's part of the skill. I think I would be okay, again, if the chains themselves were otherwise just a little bit better. So yeah, that's the main complaint. Fix the lunchbox, fix the chains. Maybe everything else could use a few changes, but overall this killer has come in a really decent state. So I'm very excited to see how he will perform and what the developers will do in response. But again, we're about to clock into 2 hours, so yeah, short video by our standards. Thank you very much for listening. I think I'm gonna call it, and I'll see you on the next one. If you have any super cool idea, please remember that the developers do watch videos like this. They do read the forums, and I do talk to them and try to shove as many of these ideas down their throat as they'll allow me. So please throw your good ideas at me. I'll do my best to pass them on to the devs in case they are interested, and we could maybe together help them out, make this game a little bit better than it is. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next. Oh my god, I wasn't recording this whole time. Imagine. Imagine, dude. Thank you very much again, guys. I'll see you very soon.